Oil paintings, why do they take such an absurdly long time to dry? I got a lot of really great questions on the video I posted yesterday about oil paintings and joking about them taking 6 months to a year to dry. So I figured since everybody was so nice and curious, I would just go ahead and break it down for you with my understanding as someone who is teaching herself how to oil paint for the last 5 to 6 months. Now, the short answer, if you're someone who just wants to get in and get out and you don't want to go into the deep dive that we're going to go into, oil paints take longer to dry than something like acrylics because they don't have moisture in them, okay? They are oil based and the oil goes through a different process of drying. It actually goes through a process that's curing versus acrylics, which do have moisture in them and evaporate and dry much quicker. Now, I can already hear the proper oil painters screaming at me through the phone. And I know some of you are nerds like me who want a better explanation of that. Like, okay, that's great, no moisture, but like, why though? It really comes down to the paints and how painters work with them themselves. Oil paints are made essentially with an oil and a pigment bound together, okay? And then the oil painter comes along and they add a medium to that, usually another oil, to then work with on a surface of their choice to achieve a selected look. Now, unlike acrylic, which you can see here, acrylic has water in it, okay? And it's also got some other moisture in it. And those things evaporate, okay? And that is why it dries and why it dries so fastly. As they meet the air, it evaporates, ta-da, dry paint. Now it's different with oils. As you can see here, what happens with oils, because they don't have that water in them, what they actually do is as they meet air, they pull oxygen in. That oil just absorbs a lot of oxygen, which then causes it to harden and it becomes a kind of glue, essentially, that painters use to put the pigment onto the surface. Depending on which oil you use as a medium or what oils are in the paint, let's say linseed oil, because that's the most common, that oil will continue to just pull in oxygen from the air around it until it gets to a point where it can become really brittle. So this is not the same process as the acrylics, right? Which are allowing waters to evaporate out. This oil never really dries. It is constantly pulling in oxygen and it will break down over time. Now, here's where it really gets interesting. There are a lot of other things that affect drying time, okay? And this is why every good oil painter you know, not me, the good ones, they are masters of chemistry and color theory, like you have no idea. So one of the first big things that can affect drying time is the quality of the paint that you're using. If you use a cheap paint, like a lot of starter paints or some student paints are, they come with a lot of additives and they come with a lot of fillers, right? Which means that they're going to be thicker. They may not spread the way you want them to. They may not work with the other mediums the way you want to. You don't get coverage, yada, yada, yada. There's variables. Versus a higher quality paint, which tends to have purer ingredients. They spread like butter. The drying times tend to be a little bit quicker depending on the color, depending on what you're doing, what you're mixing it with, and are a lot more predictable. So the quality of the paints definitely has an effect on drying time, which artists know well. The next thing that really affects drying time is the actual colors that are being used in the painting itself. Earth tones, like this burnt umber, dry faster than non-earth tones, which is why you will see a lot of oil painters use earth tones like burnt umber to tone their canvases and to do their underpainting. But then there's also large and small particle colors to consider. Larger particle colors, like this ultramarine, tend to have larger particles. So the paint tends to be thicker, which means it's going to dry slower. Then you have your smaller particle paints, right? They've got smaller particle pigments in them, like this titanium white. Because they have smaller particles, the paints tend to be thinner, more pliable, easier to work with, faster drying times. In theory, there's always an asterisk in oil painting. You learn that very fast. But yeah, oil painters have to think about that, like those really expert ones that you stand in front of their painting and you're like, oh my God, what is that? They have to think about that large particle, small particle, how they dry, when they're going to dry, because sometimes you need something to dry slower so that you can come back to it and blend things, add details, whatever, than a faster drying paint. It's a balance. The next thing that affects drying time, which again, you have to think about not just for the end result as an oil painter, but for the actual action of painting when you're in there trying to problem solve, is mediums. It is the oil or other medium that you mix with the paint to then work with it on the surface. Every medium has its own vibe. Oils like this thickened linseed oil, right? They dry slower. They slow the drying time of your oils, which might be desirable, might not be. Versus this drying linseed oil, which is what I use now that I know more, and it dries much faster. So when I use this, I can, generally get about 24 to 48 hours between sittings when it's dry enough for me to add the next layer. Last but not least, which it's really not, there are more things, but it's the last one I'm going to mention, is the thickness of the paint that you use. If you are someone who likes to go in really thick and heavy with a palette knife and get lots of texture, that's going to dry slower than someone who is going in with nice, thin, precise layers. It's a similar thing if you're someone who likes to color block and just go in and put in the colors and then blend them and add details. That can get pretty thick pretty fast, and that's going to dry slower, again, than someone who's doing like little, tiny, precise, thin layers of oil paint. And these are literally all things that you have to consider when you're like really seriously planning out an oil painting and trying to kind of elevate it to the next level, as it were. And for those who would like to learn more about this, I recommend the Oil Painter's Handbook, which is where I got all this information from that I shared with you today. And it is a fantastic read and will teach you so much, not just about color theory, but like the art of oil painting as well. Follow for more.